if I can welcome you here to UCT Faculty of Law this evening to our seminar series on wildlife in crisis. And of course, we know that the issue of wildlife trafficking is really of enormous concern for many people, both policymakers and the ordinary public. And while the debate is by no means confined to South Africa, there is a focus on our country because of the wildlife resources that we have and the urgency of the matter. And of course, that's most clear in the case of the rhino, of which we will hear about in the next 3 days, whose numbers continue to dwindle. But of course, it applies to other species too. Our timing and our choice of subject is crucial from UCT's perspective, given that a government committee of inquiry on the subject of wildlife trafficking with a focus on the rhino is busy with its work as we speak. We've divided the subject matter over the 3 evenings in the following way, and we hope that that leads to a progression of the debate. This evening, we will begin with an overview of where things stand from a number of different perspectives, what we have termed a status report on people and wildlife. And we've tried to bring together a selection of distinguished speakers to add different perspectives to the discussion and provide us to some extent a status report. Tomorrow evening, we turn to examine the debate around what the solutions might be, including looking at alternative perspectives on the trade debate. Finally, on Wednesday, we will explore the challenges faced by criminal justice responses to illicit trafficking in wildlife products. And we hope each of those discussions, each of those seminars complement each other. Last year, at about this time, the Center of Criminology ran a similar set of evening events focused on gangsterism and drugs, an issue that, as you know, is of enormous concern to people in the Western Cape. Our objective then, and as with this seminar series, is to have an open and public debate on a neutral platform about an issue that I think we all care very much about. And in this regard, we have tried to present as balanced a program as possible, one that includes all viewpoints and hopefully generates discussion amongst us. And that's been the commitment of all 3 partners to this event: the Center of Criminology, the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, and the Conservation Action Trust. And I want to pay tribute to our partners, the Conservation Action Trust, Francis Gerard, who I can't see immediately, who has really worked very, very hard to make this event a reality, as well as to my own colleagues at the Center. The Center's own growing work in the area of illicit markets, criminal networks, and organized crime is supported by the South African National Research Foundation, including work on illicit trafficking in wildlife products. And we continue to expand our program, building up a group of postgraduate students focusing on African issues and impacts. From the perspective of the Global Initiative, which has borne most of the costs for the meeting, this is a crucial debate, but only one of the debates that the initiative is currently supporting. The initiative is headquartered in Geneva. It was formed by a group of concerned senior law enforcement officials, development practitioners, and policymakers, many of whom are of the opinion that current law enforcement efforts in response to a myriad of illicit markets are not working as well as they should. And the initiative includes a growing network of experts with a wide diversity of views. And our objective is to provide a platform to debate and to sponsor analytical and research work around illicit markets. So we continue to hold high-level, often off-record discussions around possible solutions. And I would like to acknowledge the support of the government of Norway for this seminar in particular. Let me once again welcome you again to UCT, to thank in particular our distinguished speakers. I think for some of them it feels like going back to university to sit in front of a lecture hall. We are very appreciative. We know people have traveled a very long way to be here. I trust that we will have fruitful discussions in a constructive spirit over the next couple of days. So without further ado, I hand over to my colleague, Professor Manu Ramutsindela from the Department of Environmental and Geographic Science here at UCT. Manu himself is a distinguished scholar who's written on issues of transfrontier nature conservation, amongst others. Manu, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. And thanks, Mark, for the opening remarks. I'm going to be chairing these sessions, and with us we have got distinguished speakers. I'm going to introduce them to you. And I thought I should do this just before they make the presentations, so you have a sense of who is speaking to you. Our first speaker is Johan Juster, who is the Major General Commanding Officer working for special projects in South African national parks. Most of you would, of course, know him as somebody who is trying to put off the fires in the Kruger National Park. We also have Mchecha Mulukwane, who is the National Secretary of People and Parks. When I asked him who he represents in this audience, he says he represents people. So I suspect he's also representing all of us. But his main focus, of course, is on people who live closer to protected areas. We also have Tessa Rayner, right at the end of the row, who works for Traffic, an organization working in Eastern Southern Africa. Our fourth speaker is the British High Commissioner, Judith McGregor, who will give us some insights on the Kasane conference. All these speakers are bringing with them ideas that we hope we will be able to debate. Universities are known for debates. It's a place of debate. Very often when we meet at conferences, we expect that we will come out with resolutions. We don't think so here. We think there are different views, and we need to entertain them. We need to think through them, and they should help inform what we think are the best solutions by the time we come to the third day.
Thank you, Professor, High Commissioner, members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen. I might disappoint in that my talk is not that strategic. I find myself in a very tactical environment, even though I realize we've got to have strategic insight into what is happening. I'm not underestimating anybody. I doubt whether many people realize what is happening to illicit wildlife trade, to Africa, to our region, to South Africa, our parks, and specifically Kruger Park. So I will lean towards rhino and towards Kruger, not because that's all I know of all that is important. I'm here on behalf of SANParks. I need not lecture any one of you on that picture. On that picture, significant is that the cash for the sought-after commodities is Africa. In Africa, East Africa. And in East Africa, South Africa, and the Kruger National Park. This has become a strategic issue. We need not debate this or have a long story, what is a strategic issue and what attention should be given to it. And people say an issue is strategic if you look at the resources allocated to that issue, your time and your other resources. Apart from a strategic issue, I'm not trying to be funny with this slide. About the rhino, there is something illogical. There is something soft issue like you've never seen. There's rhino fever. This creature of prehistoric origin, to Africans, to South Africans, is just not any species. Species go extinct every month. You look at our own penguins here, you look at the whaling, you look at wildlife the globe over. Rhino is different, and I'm stating this tonight next to the fact that it is a strategic issue, because this unleashes energy. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative. This builds political temperature. This makes us think short term. This makes us sometimes do silly things, even as leaders, and we've got to be careful with the rhino issue for that, as serious as it is. I firmly believe, and I'm not trying to stand here as a political leadership or even as a senior leader in conservation, but we've got to follow a whole-of-government approach. And this is only schematic, and it's only pointing towards Kruger. Next to Kruger is the rest of our country and the rest of our region. We've got to get a whole-of-government approach. This is organized crime we're fighting. Yes, we are the custodians, our minister, our director general, but this is organized crime we're fighting, and it's serious. Let's not argue where the money goes. It's definitely not going into orphanages or buying computers for schools or something, that we can be sure of. I can assure you we've all been party to the strategy. You know, what is a strategy? People say we don't have a strategy. We have a national strategy, and it was introduced by the minister in September, again recently at a media conference, and I don't want to dwell here. This is too wordy, but it is compulsory interventions. On the right-hand side, what do you do with the asset? What do we do with rhino? This thing that is so valuable to some and worthless to others. How do you make a live rhino more worth than a dead rhino? Then, of course, there are economic choices, and there are game changers. And through that glasses, Sandparks look at this with our 22 parks, of which Kruger houses rhino and 6 other. And sorry for leaning rhino again, and sorry for not including all the private parks, the provincial parks. It's only to say this is our country. I'm satisfied from where I sit that we have the necessary strategy and the legal framework and the policy framework that goes with it. Let's go one level down, and I try and explain how we implement from where we sit. This is the Republic of Kruger. Like the rhino, Kruger is not just any place. All parks are important. And Builders Beach is important. And Table Bay is important. But Kruger, we cannot lose, and I'm not trying to be dramatic, we cannot lose the war in Kruger. How can any conservationist in this country ever look anybody in the eye if we lose the war in Kruger? So it's the rhino and it's Kruger. Not only that, this place that has a 1,000-kilometer boundary, 350 boundary with Mozambique, 2 million hectares. It's bigger than 40 or 50 of the countries on the planet. And yet, sometimes we see it very simple. We see the game park with 10 rhino the same as this place. The naked facts are the following, and it doesn't give me pleasure to show it. Although the gradient has changed, this is where we're heading. So people ask me, are you winning? And as painful as it is, the final symptom of winning will be get these numbers down, get that graph down. But I would like to really caution against a catastrophe approach, or that it's all lost or we're achieving nothing. That is not true. It's taking time. People are justifiably impatient, and the public says, what are you doing? And there's a perception that we have loads of money. Yes, we're well resourced. And we do all of these things, and we give the strategies, and yet. If we face the facts, that's the number of poachers that were taken out last year. Just to give you a perspective. So it was 386 in total. We would like to grow the middle and the pillar to the right, the blue one. You clear a park from the outside. We cannot clear the park from the inside. It's fallacy. It's like sitting in your house and waiting for the burglar to come. That's not how it works. But that's the number. And that's hard work. There are no medals hanging on trees in Kruger. This is hard work, primarily by a Ranger Corps, supported by our other security forces. That's the number of weapons that was taken out of the system. Again, we want to grow the 2 middle pillars. You must take out more weapons with your Mozambique alliance and more weapons to the west in your private park allowance. What keeps us sane, and I see time is running, there's a poacher community around Kruger. This is only bubbles to indicate where at any point the poaching comes from. So we see number of poachers, incidents. This tells you that there is a poacher community of roughly 6,000 around Kruger, directly involved. There's a lot more. Everything I'm saying tonight is conservative, that I can guarantee you. It's very conservative. One wouldn't like to cry wolf. That's not the point. It won't help anybody. Those are the naked facts. That's the truth. Close to 5,000 poachers set foot in Kruger last year. We had 111 contacts. It's 2 firefights a week. Even in our infamous bush war, that didn't really happen always. It's intense. And we've got to do it. You've got to enforce the law. We've got to match what the Rangers do in Kruger with what we do elsewhere. This is just a graph to indicate the work of the thin green line. The bottom graph, yes, it's still escalating, poacher successes. The top graph is confirmed poacher activities in the park. And in between there, you have the thin green line. In between, that is what we achieve with what is done in Kruger to avoid conservatively 3 times the losses we do have now. If we look at the facts, we're primarily in Kruger addressing the bottom of this crime triangle. We need to go up in this. We need to collapse crime networks with the help of our intelligence agencies and the police. I'm getting into Sandparks and into Kruger. We have a simple philosophy. Our philosophy says, think big, start small, act now. And this is not MBA mumbo jumbo. We don't have time. You've got to act. Don't do analysis paralysis. If a thing can work, start it and learn as you go. And think big. It translates, furthermore, into the strategy as we approach. You have an asset. The rhino is an asset. Almost of zero value to you, of immense value to a lot of other people, millions. Inside the park, you protect your asset and you manage your asset. You relocate some of them. Can you do something to the horn? Can you evaluate the horn? Those are options that we look at. The key lies with your communities. The only long-term solution for counter-poaching lies in community beneficiation, not awareness. Yes, awareness is also good. We need to go revolutionary on community projects and co-ownership. And I'm not saying this to be politically correct. Then, of course, you look at your allies, your neighboring parks and your country. You look at international collaboration, and you've got to collapse crime networks, international crime networks. Simpler, more in Kruger. In Kruger, on the basis of that triangle, we had to convert a ranger corps into an anti-poaching force. A lot of people writing these days talking about how military can you go. Is it justifiable? Is it now because there's a retired general? We have no option. You will perish in the bush of Africa unless you train your rangers well and prepare them for the facts that you have seen. While we do that, to protect, to react and become more proactive, we participate in the longer term, the technology development and in the demand reduction. We've divided Kruger up into zones, and one would not necessarily like to go public on the figures at the right. At that bottom part, the yellow part, a quarter of the world's rhino graze there. That is why we call it the intensive protection zone. You've got to dig in our heels. As much as we believe you go outside, you gain intelligence, you become proactive, we've got to dig in our heels there. They'll shoot 10 a day if they really try there. The center part is the joint protection zone, in close cooperation with on the Mozambique side, on the eastern side with the concessions, and to the western side with the game reserves, the private game reserves between Skakusa and Palabora. In the north, it's different, it's composite, because we have very close working relationship with the Limpopo National Park. Don't make this an island. Grow the estate, work together, make sure that you get the synergies, every little bit of synergy possible. Shortly about the intensive protection zone. This will be primarily funded by the Buffett Foundation, and everybody thinks that the 250 million that he gave us can do it. You cannot. But at least we know what technologies and we know what to do there. All those gates, the 5 gates will be upgraded. Each of the 6 ranger posts will have a reaction force with dogs. Dogs play a big role. On the perimeters, we'll have seismic cables and acoustic detectors, and we'll have a dedicated helicopter. And there will be other means of detection that one wouldn't like to discuss in an open forum. In the south, we go rather static while we still work outside on our intelligence, human intelligence, but you add to it technical intelligence. This should show effect from September or so this year. It took us a while to understand what technologies can be used. A technology roadmap. It was written everywhere in all strategies. Nobody ever knew what it cost and what to do. We know rather well what to do with technology, and not to have it for the sake of playthings, specifically not for the retired old general. A very important part of the strategy in Kruger, and this could be any other park, it could be Park X. You'll see the Kruger National Park. To the west of it, you see the blue Game Reserves United. About a dozen game reserves working with us. There's no fence between us and them. One radio frequency, share intelligence, share air assets, joint operations, and it works. Northeast, we call that Operation Capricorn, the cooperation with the Limpopo National Park. A lot of people want hot pursuit and so on. Yes, sometimes we feel like it. We're doing joint cross-border operations with the Limpopo National Park, and we train together. South of there, from Masangir down to Komati, about 8 concessions, millions of rand invested, and that is where we're focusing now. We're meeting in Maputo again on Wednesday to make that more solid so that we have the one whole cooperating towards clearing the park from the outside and About Mozambique, I spoke this afternoon over lunch. There's good progress in Mozambique. I cannot stand here and tell you everything is okay now. There is good progress in Mozambique. You'll see there Operation Capricorn in the north, Rubicon in the south, Operation Ndobombo, close cooperation with the police, and we work closely with the Chesano Foundation, who is linked to the Peace Park Foundation. And if this sounds airy-fairy, it's not that airy-fairy. We really are pulling resources and we're getting results. There is good progress in Mozambique. This is roughly where we go forward. If we talk enforcement, we are the people who know that you cannot win with law enforcement. You've got to go beyond. So you've got to look at your zones. In those 3 zones, your alliances, technology, and you've got to have more intelligence. That's our weakest point, to become more proactive. And I say, again, this could have been any other park. It could have been the guys fighting here on Table of View with the abalone. Last part, we are dependent on donor money. Some of what you see there comes from donor money, and you'll see some of it is ranger focused. If you look, yeah, you won't see it from there. But these are upgrading of houses. This is air mobility. This is becoming more effective, not only efficient. We've got to keep the focus on people. That was a team recently photographed at night after a success. We must understand that they hold in their hand the final green line. While we meet, while we go to the consumer countries, while we do the community projects, we're working hard on the families of these rangers. At the bottom left is the first group of rangers' wives that we got together with, in their culture, the permission of the husband to prepare them for the stress that they live with. We place a huge emphasis on training. Training, improving over a wide spectrum and really empowering our rangers. As much as we go for technology, the regional solution, the alliances that I showed you, as much as we mold together the task force that is there, we work with people, and people that are doing their utmost best. They must still improve. Of course, we must still improve.
Program Director, organizers of the seminar, and fellow panelists, and everyone present here, allow me first to thank Professor Mark Shaw for inviting us as People in Parks to participate in this very important seminar. What is this People in Parks? People in Parks concept was developed in 2003 during the World Park Congress, which was hosted by South Africa in Durban. When our people who had acquired land rights within protected area, and in this instance were at that time the Makuleke community and the Richtersveld in Northern Cape, went to the venue of the Congress and protested with the slogan, "Not for us, without us," or "Nothing for us, without us." And then the Director General in the Department of Environmental Affairs and Tourism then, which is Environmental Affairs now, agreed that they will form a structure which will meet biennially at national conferences to take the matters forward. The first conference was held in 2004 at Swadini, and at that time it was Northern Province, but today it's in Mpumalanga. The objective of People in Parks is to work with government to take forward the needs of our people. If you go into the history of the establishment of parks in the country, when in 1926 the South African National Parks Board was established, the main objective was the protection of biodiversity with specific reference to wildlife. But that was only for the benefit of the white community in the country. And in that process, our people were removed from some of these lands forcefully by those regimes of the time. And our people were not compensated. And our people then developed anger, which in some communities still exists. Now, when the new government came into power in 1994, they developed laws to facilitate land rights restitution to our people. And therefore, some of our people claimed their land within already proclaimed national parks, like I've indicated about the Makuleke people. Now, if they gain this land rights in terms of the Land Restitution Act, it's their land. Now, what should happen to that land? What should they do with the land, because it is theirs? It was therefore that a cabinet decision was taken in 2006 that even if a community wins the land rights within a protected area, they will not physically go and occupy the land. And that land would continue to be used for biodiversity conservation. But I think the General has already indicated that. But what becomes important now is that these communities should begin to benefit from the use of their land. They should become partners with government and conservation authorities in this country. And in that process, they should begin to benefit from their land use. And that beneficiation model that can be agreed upon, based on the co-management agreement strategy that has been developed by government, will then determine how the people will benefit financially and otherwise from protected areas. Now, our people, because of that anger that started long ago, they were removed, as I said. Now, when they look at protected areas, they regarded it as that which caused their poverty and dire status of hunger. They were not part of it, because in terms of the laws of the time, they were not allowed even access into those parks. Now, if it is not theirs, destruction of that property and destruction or killing of wild animals or wildlife there, to them, it was like they were in defiance of those laws because of how they suffered. Now, the new regulation says they should benefit. But now, do they actually benefit? I'm happy that, General, you have indicated that today. I know there are community forums from villages around the Kruger Park, and some of them are participating in People and Parks. So it's an indication that we are moving towards the right direction. Now, I'm giving this background scenario so that we understand why some of our people still go on the rampage of killing this wild life of ours. Here in South Africa, the Department of Environmental Affairs is doing something about it, but working cooperatively with other security clusters, including SANParks, You have seen, I've been watching when the general here was making a presentation that SANParks is really doing something very, very important in terms of defending our wildlife against poachers. One other threat to wildlife is the conflict between human life and wildlife. And these included most of the predators like the lions, tigers, and so forth. This relationship of rivalry between humans and wild animals typically arises from territorial proximity, which involves reliance on the same resources, or a threat to human safety. Communities living adjacent to protected areas, using the same resources like water and maybe grazing. Sometimes these protected wildlife, sometimes it happens that they get out of the boundaries into the villages and their mealie fields. And in that process, they devour their livestock, they damage their crops, and sometimes SANParks and the department disown these animals and renege to pay compensation to the people. This for the damages caused by these animals. They say once it is outside, SANParks would say, we'll disown it. And government, on the other side, when it is outside, no, that belongs to SANParks. And our people become confused. Livestock and crop depredation are the most prevalent causes of antagonism towards wildlife to an extent that has threatened some predator species. If lions maybe get out and devour people's cattle, people go out and want to kill those lions. To them, killing those animals, it's defending their livestock, their livelihood. Therefore, SANParks and the Department of Environmental Affairs sometimes have said, yes, I've already indicated that sometimes they disown this. You find processes now to compensate the people being a challenge. And therefore, farmers, our livestock farmers now then retaliate by killing the animals, which include those species threatened with extinction. To local stock farmers, extinction of animals they regard as threats to their stocks can be the best option for the sake of their livestock. Poaching, therefore, becomes rampant and with links that are tricky to disentangle, including commercial pressure, banditry, and lawlessness, which then contribute towards intensified illegal hunting within protected areas as a measure of defiance. Our people then use that as a matter of defiance. Although hunting as a measure of defiance happens almost all wildlife reserves, poaching cannot be attributed to this single factor. There are many factors. Another factor is the human population that is growing. The growth of human population goes with the demand for wildlife products. People in developed countries have become used to a lifestyle which fuels demand for wildlife products. They expect to have access to a variety of leather goods, ivory, and rhino horns. Legal hunters thrill in killing wildlife. Legal hunters is mostly very rich people. They just kill for the sake of killing so that, it should indicate their wealth status. But on the other hand, it's destructive to our precious wildlife. Conversely, the extreme poverty of others means they regard wildlife as a means to meet their short-term needs and will trade it for whatever they can get, no matter how dangerous, and without considering its sustainability. Poverty. When I made a presentation to the committee on whether sites should allow legal trade of rhino horns sometimes last month, I said to them, who then has the right to kill wildlife? Is it the rich? Is it the poor? Who is there? Now, the poor do it, and particularly in our country, in defiance. And the rich do it just for amusement. So who then should be allowed to do the killing? If you remember, our people, their livelihood had depended on these wildlife resources. Not necessarily wildlife, let me just say biodiversity resources, which include wildlife. Now, when you remove them from that place, you remove them from their means of livelihood. So this one is killing for amusement, this one is killing for a livelihood. Now, how do we deal with that? Because both of them, it is a fact that they destroy or kill our wildlife. Another serious contributor to wildlife poaching is corrupt conservation management authority officials and some rangers. Rich members of illegal wildlife poaching syndicates offer them substantial amounts of cash and as bribe so that they be able to illegally gain entrance into the parks to kill whatever wildlife species they choose to, particularly rhinos and elephants, with the promise not to search their vehicles when they exit the parks. We read about this in the press, where now some official and some rangers connive with these syndicates so that they can be able to poach our precious animals in exchange for cash. I don't know whether is it because sun parks or the conservation agencies do not pay them enough, which I doubt. But they connive. These syndicates are very rich people. They have got all the things that they wanted to buy in this world. Now they don't know what to use their monies for, so they just buy anything. So they can offer millions of rands to a person who can make them get a rhino horn. So that is why maybe our people get corrupted and accept those millions. We're not sure, but maybe it will be investigated. What then should we do as a country? What do we suggest ourselves as the people? It is appreciated that the Department of Environmental Affairs, in working with all the other departments in sun parks, non-governmental organizations and neighboring countries, are doing all in their power to reduce wildlife crime in Southern Africa. Strategies have been developed to deal with the scourge of wildlife poaching. Rhino poaching, for example, has been declared a national security threat, which they elevated to the National Joint Security Committee, which implemented the national strategy in the safety and security of rhino of South Africa. As people in parks, we recommend that South Africa should craft legislation that will give law enforcers additional powers to deal with poachers in the form of stricter, if not harsher, sanctions on wildlife rangers and conservation agencies officials who connive with poaching syndicates by accepting bribes and allowing poachers illegal access into parks. We know legally in the country, a person is not guilty until proven so by the court of law. But we see, if you see a person just killing a rhino just for the sake of its horn, and then this person is still said to be a suspect, whereas you actually saw this person. It requires some constitutional, I don't know how to put it, general, because it's more constitutional, because in terms of the Constitution, that person is not guilty until proven by the court. But he has actually done or committed that crime. So there is a lot of issues that requires legislative review in the country in terms of sanctions against these criminals. Poachers found to have used this method. You know, there is this method which is very, very, very cruel, where people use the leg hold traps. You know, these traps that catches like this. That is very criminal, because the animal, when you set that trap, you don't tell it that, please don't catch an eland, catch a rhino. It catches any other animal and it dies, you know, very painfully. Imagine if it catches you. And what we are saying is that people found to have used those kind of traps and even snares using, you know, steel cables, those should be incarcerated for very long periods of time, General. Now, what is important, which the media reports also, is that there are some farmers, some private wildlife farmers who have rhinos and probably even elephants on their farms. But these guys, instead of networking with others to form an association, they want to remain on their own, and they themselves shoot the rhino and then cry foul that their rhinos have been poached. You know of some of these incidents that happened in this country. And now what we are saying is that if this kind of farmers are found, what I'm going to say is also constitutional, but it's very harsh, which may even trample over people's rights, human rights. Because we are suggesting that if such a farmer is found, his land must be expropriated without any compensation and never to be allowed to run a wildlife farm. And this we suggest because it will scare other farmers from that similar practice. We know it is harsh, but it can be a deterring agent. In our country in South Africa in the past, and in some instances currently, wildlife rangers were not fully trained in security management competencies. Or time up. Yeah, my time is up, but I'm just about to finish. You see, by competencies, I'm happy, General, you showed how you're trying to train your rangers. But what I want to emphasize is that well-trained rangers in GPS locations, in all those kind of things, and even in detectives, they will gain international prominence, and once that happens, syndicate members from other countries will think twice before they want to come to South Africa to poach our animals, because they will know that once you get there, those rangers, the manner in which they are competent, you will never succeed. They will get you caught. Let me read my last sentence. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize the fact that if we all join hands as equal partners in the management of wildlife conservation, Wildlife populations threatened with extinctions will be saved and will increase going into the future. The new approach to recognize local communities as partners in the management of wildlife conservation and receipt of both tangible and intangible benefits, recognizing their rights and land ownership and control of protected areas is welcomed by the people, but on the ground, not much is changed. Hence, the many civil defiance of conservation laws and regulations. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Tess. I'm from Traffic, and we're going to be doing a quick review of the Asian consumer markets for rhino, horn, and ivory. I'm just going to give you a quick little background into Traffic. Traffic is a wildlife trade monitoring network. It's the leading non-governmental organization. It works globally in trade in animals and plants in the context of both biodiversity conservation and sustainable development. It was established in 1976, so it's a little while ago, and it's developed into a global network that is research-driven and action-oriented. It employs about 120 people around the world, based in about 30 countries, and these people are strategically based in key wildlife trade areas. Traffic is governed by the Traffic Committee, which is a steering group composed of members of Traffic's partner organizations, which are WWF and IUCN. And what that means is that Traffic is also able to draw on the expertise and resources of these organizations in order to help deliver sort of effective conservation action. And we'll come up in a second. Sorry. What's not coming up is that what I just wanted to say is that Traffic has some key areas that they work in. So research and analysis, support to enforcement, advocacy, as well as reducing consumer demand through behavior change. So now we're going to talk about the legal trade in wildlife. So the primary motivating factor for wildlife traders is economic, basically. And this ranges from small-scale local income generation to major profit-oriented businesses, such as marine fisheries and logging companies. The thing is that, in fact, most of us actually are involved in wildlife trade in some way or another, even if it's just as end consumers of wildlife products. And what we have to remember is that the trade in wildlife can contribute significantly to rural incomes, as well as local economies. And if local communities can be incentivized to use land use options for other reasons, such as conservation and biodiversity protection, then this can also contribute to that local economy, because they'll be basically conserving the habitats as well as the species. If we move on to the illegal trade in wildlife, this is basically controlled by organized crime. And these syndicates work all over the world. The value of the illegal wildlife trade is estimated to be between 10 and 20 billion US dollars annually. And this figure excludes illegal logging as well as illegal fisheries. The illegal wildlife trade is said to be one of the largest illegal trades after drugs, counterfeit goods, and human trafficking. So you can see the effect it might have. With a greater number of flights and with more and more low-cost carriers emerging, the scope for smuggling by air has increased, and large volumes are now being transported by air because it's fast and efficient. The map you see above on the left was drawn up from ETIS, which is the Elephant Trade Information System. They basically capture seizure data, and then they're able to map trade routes. And this data was mapped to show the notable trade routes and hubs of the wildlife trade. This information is important because what it means is that then governments can take stronger action, enforcement action, and they'll be able to focus their efforts in the right places. Because as much as we have local and international laws to crack down on this sort of trade, the fact of the matter is that it's still happening. As you can see from this flowchart, as there is increased economic and demographic growth in Asia, so there is an increased demand for wildlife products, including luxury goods, wild meats, pets, as well as traditional Chinese medicine products. The result is increased trafficking in wildlife. So rhino horn, ivory, tigers, pangolins, reptiles, bear bile, rosewood. And this in turn leads to the decline of Asian species, and inevitably as these species become harder to obtain, increased pressure is placed on wildlife in other regions. Of course, some of these species are not found in Asia, and so therefore automatically they would look to other regions. But just to be clear, economic growth is not a bad thing. But it is facilitating wildlife trade and demand for and consumption of wildlife products. The newfound wealth basically spurs people to want to buy luxury goods and to spend money extravagantly to show people their wealth and to publicly display their economic power. So this graphic here just shows the figures that I mentioned before. By its very nature, it's really, really difficult to quantify the annual value of illegal trade in wildlife. So this graphic just illustrates that across different data sources and analyses, illegal wildlife trade consistently comes up as one of the most lucrative forms of criminal trade. And it runs into billions of dollars. This map here has also been mapped on ETIS data. And what it does is it's shown the illegal ivory trade priority countries of concern. So these countries have been identified. There's priority export countries, transit, as well as end-use markets for ivory. As you can see, the primary ones as end-use markets are China and Thailand. And then you've got your ports in Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines, and Hong Kong as transit routes. So it's important to note that Kenya and Tanzania are exporting ivory that's not just sourced from their own countries, but also from Central Africa, and this is then being exported. South Africa, although we haven't been experiencing high levels of poaching at all with elephants, it's still used as a port. Then there are some secondary countries of concern, mostly looking at Egypt, which has traditionally actually been a consumer of ivory and for cultural items. So, but now its importance is rather due to the unregulated domestic ivory market that is happening there. Ethiopia, as a transit country, is important because it has direct flights to Asia, so that's why it came up on the radar. These are the illegal rhino horn trade past end-use markets. It's important to understand, once again, that poaching of rhino horn for various uses is not new. So during the 1970s to 1990s, there were several major traders in rhino horn. China has always had a steady market for rhino horn, mostly for traditional Chinese medicine. However, Japan, Korea, Taiwan were all leading rhino horn consumer countries, and Yemen as well. They used to use rhino horn to make dagger handles, as you can see from the photo. The fact that most of these countries are no longer trading, they're no longer rhino horn consumer countries, means that there are lessons that can be learned about the contributing factors, which aided the initial rise in demand, but also the factors that allowed for the trade to subside. So there are lots of lessons to be learned. So one of these factors that influenced that was the effect or the result of the threat of sanctions under CITES and US law. And as this figure shows, in 1993, Taiwan, South Korea, and China all removed rhino horn as a legal ingredient for traditional medicines. And almost overnight, there was a major drop in poaching. It was pointed out to me earlier that, it's not that sanctions stopped working, it's just that a new market developed for rhino horn. So it's important to bear that in mind. So we all know that with economic growth in both China and Vietnam, and the subsequent disposable income available, the illegal trade in rhino horn has been revived. So this graphic basically illustrates all the current rhino range states in orange, which you can see have been decreased quite drastically. And it also shows Vietnam as China, and China as the major current end-use markets. Historically, many conservationists and conservation organizations have responded to their stakeholder desire to raise awareness about threatened species through showing their beauty and their majesty and appealing, for a sense of compassion. But it's now been seen that this approach can, in fact, unintentionally promote consumption of wildlife. And this could be seen, for example, in the case of rhino horn, where it's being used as a status symbol. So showing a picture of a beautiful rhino is not really what you want to do. So one way to reduce consumer demand is via consumer behavior change. It asks why people are buying these products in the first place, which is an important question, and ultimately attempts to undermine that motivation and halt the buying. It engages different leaders, social leaders, spiritual leaders, cultural leaders, business leaders, in questioning threatened species consumption. And it asks them to start advocating refrain from using these products and championing different ways. So Traffic uses a 5-step approach. There are other approaches, but they're using this one at the moment. And I'm going to lead you through it really, really quickly. So step 1 is about understanding consumption behaviors. So these are examples of some of the motivators and behaviors for rhino horn users in Vietnam. So symbol of wealth, interestingly enough, and symbol of power have emerged quite recently as motivators. And they're associated with conspicuous consumption. Basically, behaviors among the wealthy, where they're just buying the rhino horn just as a status symbol to demonstrate their wealth. So they may have a party, invite friends over, and have the rhino horn there, and then they may just actually use that rhino horn as well to show that it can prevent a hangover. So the other two on here, assurance that I did the best and peace of mind, are also both beliefs that rhino horn has medicinal properties. The next thing is to understand your consumers. They reinforce the motivations and behaviors from the last slide. These were quotes from a survey that Traffic conducted in Vietnam of rhino horn users. And the idea is to improve our understanding of the motivations. And this will enable Traffic basically to target their behavior change work to the right market. I'm just going to read you one of these quotes. It says, "The rareness of rhino horn made it become valuable, especially with Vietnamese who are really keen with special, unique stuff." And it's another one quickly is, "Rhino horn has a long history and people said it is good to prolong life of the one who suffer from fatal diseases such as cancer." So then what they did was they created a consumer archetype. This is just one of the consumer archetypes of someone who would consume rhino horn for status reasons. And so from the information gathered, be able to demonstrate those characteristics and then once again target the marketing in the right way. And then comes the next step, which is actually looking at referencing behavioral change models and theories in order to identify what's going to work best. So here shows Rogers' diffusion of innovation theory. And the idea behind it is that a new behavior can be spread through society when you have certain types of messengers, spreading the behavior change message on your behalf. And these are known as innovators. And so in the case of Mr. L, those innovators could include business leaders as well as entrepreneurs, anyone who he might respect and look up to. And then this is the part, step 4, developing the message. So step 4 involves designing that message to change behavior. And this involves social marketing approaches. So social marketing is not social media, and roughly defined, it's basically marketing for the social good. So an example of what they're doing in Vietnam is using something called the Chi campaign. So Chi is a Vietnamese concept. It basically means will or strength of character. And so what they're doing is they're basically conveying how Chi is what determines success through, instead of conspicuous consumption of rhino horn. So what it actually says here is a successful businessman relies on his will and strength of mind. Success comes from opportunities you create, not from a piece of horn. And there are a few of these. Traffic at the moment has got there about 140 billboards spread across Ho Chi Minh City as well as Hanoi. And then you have to roll out the message. So you have to make sure that it's reaching the right people in the right places. Face-to-face messaging is very effective, and as is encouraging leaders and innovators and pioneers in the business world to champion the messages. Traffic basically conducted a baseline study in 2013, and the follow-up's going to be in 2016. They're also running campaigns for elephant ivory, marine turtle, as well as tiger bone. And I just want to leave you with this quote. Changing buyer behavior in consumer countries is important, and as part of this approach, Traffic also sees cross-continental cooperation as a vital part of the concerted international response to the wildlife poaching crisis, along with supporting initiatives such as improved enforcement and more engagement with local communities directly impacted by poaching. And I'm not sure who's seen the movie Inception, but the idea behind it is that you will only change your behavior if you believe that you thought up the idea to change your behavior in the first place. So, leaving you with that thought, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak quite briefly, and then I think we're probably going to take questions. And I think the more distinguished and informed speakers have all addressed you. But I'm absolutely going to talk a little bit about that last segment in the General Hustes presentation about international cooperation, and pick up a little bit on Tessa's last point about, that changing behaviors, changing demand is critical, but so is actually enforcement, so is stopping the trafficking, and so ultimately every area of this kind of trail of activity needs to be addressed, and that involves obviously an international effort. And it's great to be in this forum with, I think, an audience and certainly speakers who are very much united in a common purpose, really, wanting to sort of maintain the diversity of the wildlife around us, the beauty of it, but also the sustainability of that wildlife and what it means for the economies of countries in Africa and throughout the world. And we're talking about illegal wildlife trade, or crime, perhaps as it's more appropriately described. But actually, we shouldn't forget that there are many other threats to wildlife. Impunity in the past in terms of sport, trophy hunting. The director of the parks was telling us, and communities was telling us about that. Change of habitats, destruction of the habitat is one of the biggest things. The animals that we have got are at threat from the poachers, but they're also at threat actually from the lack of the habitat. Urbanization, changes in the water table, climate change, all of those things actually, and changes in our lifestyle, changes in some of our sort of greater urbanization and wealth, have all affected adversely a lot of species. But certainly the urgency that lay behind, I think, the activity which happened in my country in 2014 was very much driven by the statistics that you've been seeing this evening. The extraordinary growth in the poaching activity, the growth in demand that Tessa's traffic slide showed just now, and the tremendous growth in just rhino and elephant poaching. One of the statistics I have is that rhino poaching increased between 2007 and 2012 by 5,000%, which obviously is an extraordinary number. And the intensity, I think, in the General's presentation, we saw how the number of rhino being killed is going up all the time, but the amount of intensity of poaching is hugely more than that. So actually, the problems that are affecting, we are having some impact in curbing that, but not nearly enough. And I think just the sort of, if you like, the sheer sort of horror of that, that animals which in Africa were in their millions or in their 100,000s are now down to these tiny sort of, 25,000, 45,000. It's an extraordinary statistic over a very short period of time. So in February 2014, certainly the UK government decided to take an initiative on this, very much spurred actually by people in our royal family. Prince Charles, for many, many years, somebody who absolutely has done a huge amount to promote biodiversity in the UK, actually, and to maintain species, because we lose species of birds every season. But essentially, the Prince of Wales and two of his sons, Duke of Cambridge, Prince William, Prince Harry, got together with the presidents of Botswana, Gabon, Tanzania, and Chad, and representatives from 41 countries around the world, European Union, and 10 international organizations. And I think the feeling was that, yes, there is the organization of CITES, which continues to bring everybody together, which is critically important. But actually, the problem was outstripping the international response. And I think the feeling was we just had to do something to raise this issue above the bar of, oh, yet another issue of international concern, and really focus attention on that. And in London, the people who came, representing wider communities, made commitments to reduce demand, strengthen enforcement, and support sustainable livelihoods for communities affected by the illegal wildlife trade. And absolutely, I think, did capture quite an amount of attention around the world, did send out an unequivocal message to poachers and traffickers that the trade would not be tolerated, and did include, and is continuing to include, a number of countries which obviously are responsible for the demand as well, because obviously it was critical to get everybody into the same room. So that had its impact, and one of the important things from that was that there should be a follow-up conference fairly fast, and not in London or in the UK, where the animals aren't actually, that are at risk, aren't actually existing. And Botswana, which has been pretty prominent in this, took that on and agreed to have a conference in Botswana. And last month, or in March, I should say, high-level representatives from around the world gathered once more, and that was in Kasane in Botswana, to assess the progress since London and agree urgent new measures to tackle the trade. Perhaps indicative already of the difficulties of running these sorts of international collaborations was the fact that Kasane rustled up 32 countries with same number of NGOs in the European Union, but already in a sense, just keeping people to that sort of sense of commitment is very difficult. But at Kasane, nevertheless, countries agreed 15 new commitments, and they include improving the effectiveness of demand reduction campaigns, building countries' capacity on law enforcement to investigate and prosecute effectively, cracking down on financial crimes associated with the illegal wildlife trade, including money laundering, and involving communities more in protecting wildlife resources for their sustainable development, livelihoods, and economic well-being. And in many ways, quite a bit has been achieved. Countries around the world are strengthening legal frameworks against illegal trading. New programs of work are underway in destination states to reduce consumer demand for illegally traded wildlife products. A couple of examples. In October 2014, Interpol launched Operation Infraterra to track down fugitives wanted for crimes, including illegal logging and wildlife trafficking. And the first phase of the operation focused on 9 suspects. By December, 2 of those suspects, both wanted for ivory smuggling, had been arrested in Tanzania and Zambia for crimes in Kenya and Botswana. And that was one of the sort of first tracked instances which could be brought out to show how many countries were involved in a few people and a few parts of the international organized crime rings. Several countries have burned stockpiles of illegal ivory. So acts like that certainly send a clear message that actually there isn't going to be a future for this kind of wildlife illegal trafficking, but on the other hand, we've got to move faster because it's outstripping the response at the moment. Again, coming back to the statistics, rhino poaching, we're focusing because we're in South Africa on rhinos, is on the increase. 393 rhino have been lost to poaching by the end of April this year alone, almost 20% increase on the same total last year. And some estimates are that 3 rhino are being killed every day. And the problems with the elephants, with the ivory trade, also would show equally dramatic statistics. So what's happening? What is sort of, as it were, what absolutely is going forward as a result of the Kasane conference? Well, one of the things that we're doing, obviously, is now focusing on the next conference, which, interestingly and importantly, is going to be held in Vietnam, one of the countries that's transit and obviously also consumer. And I think that gives us an opportunity both to increase the law enforcement work, and that's something that we certainly bilaterally have done with the South African government, but also using our wider national crime agency networks around the world, which are also present in places like Vietnam, to try and bring that bit of intelligence, and I think we mentioned that intelligence is still not sufficient, to try and improve intelligence and to try and improve the effectiveness of the detection and obviously the application of the penalties. The CITES conference in South Africa next year provides an opportunity to do other aspects which are critical, because I think you're getting the picture that there's many, many things that one's got to do. One's got to tackle the law enforcement, one's got to reduce the demand, one's got to sort of improve the intelligence and the cooperation between national crime authorities, and one's got to obviously make it as difficult as possible in a business sense for these absolute commercial organizations to operate. And to do that, we have to operate together. And we have to use awareness raising. I think awareness raising is one of those things, yeah, okay, so we're all aware of it now, so what? But actually, one of the things that's critical about this is that I was rereading, of course for this, the Kasane document. The Kasane document is a very good document. It has in it just about every measure that I think all of the NGOs, all of the countries have come up with. The problem is it's not being enforced sufficiently or sufficiently fast around the world. And why is that? Because lack of capacity sometimes, but actually lack of political will. Not because people don't see this as a problem. They went across the world to Kasane, to London, they do. But there are many other problems. There are many other priorities. Is it absolutely the priority? And politicians in democracies respond to political will, popular will. We can all increase the amount of noise and brouhaha and pressure on our politicians. And that's what's happened in the UK over climate change. It's what's happened over conservation. And, you know, one's not passing the buck here. One is pointing out that actually governments have got to prioritize this, obviously more than we're collectively doing at the moment. But I think there's a lot that can also be done on the ground. And I think we're sort of, you know, we saw some of the technical things that are happening in sandparks. We saw some of the sort of training and effectiveness. Certainly, we're working very closely with the South African government. We're really pleased that the Environment Minister went to Kasane. We're trying to work through projects which will help to strengthen the capacity of law enforcement officials to investigate and secure convictions for transnational wildlife crime. And we're also working with communities close to the Kruger to work out what can be and how can we get buy-in, taking account of all the factors, to develop a zero-tolerance approach, both to wildlife crime and also other forms of violence that are present. And I think there's a lot of actors who are actually now taking initiatives. We have a challenge fund. If there's any NGOs in the audience, we have a challenge fund, which we will soon be launching again, with another £5 million put by our Department for International Development to bring forward neat, smart ideas that can be developed and then can be used more widely throughout South Africa and Africa more widely. I think if we don't bring this together, we are facing some very serious and challenging consequences of this failure to act. So I hope that the presence here over the 3 days, in all of these seminars that you're going to listen to, all of the solutions that you will see out there being put forward, they need to be implemented, they need to be enforced, and they need to be better coordinated. We'll be working on that with the South African government and other governments through to the Vietnamese conference next year, and also the CITES conference here in Cape Town in 2016. So I hope that gives us something to go on now and some questions. Thanks.
What we're going to do, we will take sets of questions first, and then have the speakers respond to them, and then go to the next phase of taking other questions.
A question for Ms. McGregor. My name's Adam Cruz. I'm working with Conservation Action Trust as one of the journalists. I just want to ask you, you say you're working closely with the South African government. Can you just tell us a little bit about kind of exactly what you're working with? Are you recommending policy? Are you advising? Is it in an advisory capacity? Or whatever it is. Could you just comment on that?
Okay, thanks. The next question.
Hi, it's Alison Thompson from ASCAP. One or two people brought up the issue of corruption here. And I actually think it is actually one of the most important issues that has sort of been glanced over. With all due respect to the General, you know, you can't fix the problem from the outside of the park when you've got a lot of corruption inside the park. Sitting in the house waiting for the thieves to come when they're inside the house is the problem. And I'm not talking just about the park, I'm talking about just about every single structure in the chain that is involved in this whole wildlife trafficking problem is our problem. From the rangers, the police, the hawks, government officials, customs officials, everybody is corrupt in that system. If we can fix those problems, it'll be easier to fix the organized crime problem, because organized crime flourishes in a corrupt system.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Elise Tempelhof. I'm environmental journalist for Media 24. My question is also for General Jooste. We know exactly who the bosses are in Masanjia. There is, for instance, one guy who there are warrants for his arrest for murder and two for murder in South Africa. And I just want to find out, why is he not being arrested? Everybody knows his name, but he just goes on, and he is the person who sends in these 3x3 poachers.
Okay, thank you. Anybody who can arrest this guy? Okay. The last question before I give the speakers. Okay, up there.
Primarily directed toward Mr. Molokwani, but I just have a question around increased militarization of anti-poaching efforts and the unintended consequences of that. People who get into game ranging conservation efforts don't necessarily get into it because they want to become guerrilla fighters. So it seems to me that we have an issue here, nor do we have good evidence that increased militarization is a sufficient deterrent when the risk-reward ratio for poachers is actually relatively attractive, regardless of the militarization they may or may not face when they enter a park. So it's a part question, part comment as to whether we don't need to be a little more creative about our anti-poaching efforts.
Okay, thank you. I think now I'll ask the speakers to respond to the questions.
Right. I mean, I'm not sure I can sort of, give you a whole heap of sort of more detail, other than to say that I guess there's three sort of areas in which we're working with South Africans. One obviously is just the policy discussions, I mean, in terms of how to implement the Kasane sort of resolutions, and to look forward obviously to the CITES conference and the Vietnamese conference. So sort of, how we can work together using our diplomatic networks, using our sort of influence. And one of the things we're trying to work through, for example, actually with Germany and Gabon, is a UN resolution on illegal wildlife trafficking. And we're talking also, to South Africans obviously about things like that in order to get more support. Then I mentioned the two projects that we're working on, and that's sort of part of our Prosperity Fund programming. We're going to be putting out a further call, as well as the Challenge Fund, which will be open to South African, and obviously that South African organizations, and that could be NGOs, or it could be with the South African government, to work on projects for improving training, improving sort of just literally sort of the strategy of the different aspects of each of these areas: enforcement, working on public opinion, working on, as I said, how to best work with a particular community as a possibility to show how other communities might also understand better some of the factors, because there is certainly a lot of some statistical evidence and a lot of anecdotal evidence that if you have the local communities buying into this, they do form a sort of ring of protection around particular game areas. And then I think the third area is probably working on that sort of national crime agency, particular bits of intelligence that come from particular sort of cases that are discovered, trying to work back and understand where that particular crime sort of network may have come from, whether there's any further sort of cooperation between us to swapping information, and, looking at different approaches as to how one can sort of, particularly, I mentioned, I think, money laundering and also sort of just basically the sort of the knowledge of knowing which particular groups are active. So I can't say much more about that, but it's that sort of area where we try to work on the different aspects of the issue.
Corruption is a factor. It is, however, overemphasized. I'm telling you that. Forgive me the I message. I instituted integrity testing in Kruger National Park in the beginning of 2013. And I was the first one to go forward to do the test. And all rangers did it voluntarily, despite the labor regulations that you cannot unless it's in the condition of service. It was since written in the conditions of service. And I wouldn't like this reported in the media. Our management committee last year voluntarily did the test. And our ExCo has agreed to do the test, and our board says they will do the test. I'm telling you, as a person sitting here tonight, corruption is a factor. There are rangers that is overstepping the line. And we are working on that. It's just not easy. The person is not guilty until found guilty. The fact that it's made out that half or 50 or if you have evidence, bring it. And I must stand up for the ranger. They are, unfortunately, and they cause damage. Even one corrupt person cause a lot of damage. I cannot comment on other law enforcement agencies, other parastatal state organs, that I cannot. I can talk for us in the park. It's a factor, it's an uncomfortable truth, and we had to establish a section to deal with it. Like the police has an internal investigation, but I had to establish a section to deal with it, and we are dealing with it. Will you see 10 arrests tomorrow? No. We've seen one, and unfortunately, there might be more. The poacher bosses in Mozambique, unfortunately, there's not an extradition agreement between us and Moz. We are addressing that. My counterpart from Mozambique will be in the park first week of June, and like I said, we'll be in Maputo on Wednesday, and this is higher on our agenda. I think we must just remember that although they allegedly committed crimes in South Africa also, up until last year it was not illegal to poach. There was no such law in Mozambique. That law was only passed last year, and it's only enacted now. And it is enacted. I can confirm that. I think the recent bust a week ago in Mozambique also speaks for the progress that is made in Mozambique. But it's uncomfortable that we know the addresses, the names, mobile numbers, and the registration numbers of the poacher bosses. Believe me, if there was a quicker way to do it, we would do it. It is on the agenda as we collaborate with our counterparts in Mozambique. The militarization thing, and I'm not saying this is an ex-general, it is not the fact that we've militarized too fast. You have no option. It is the fact that the other actions has not kept up with the militarization. If any person tonight can give me a responsible way how to protect the rangers, I'll do it. The anti-poaching doctrine is unique. We operate in teams of 2. We operate in extended clandestine patrols of 5 days and more. The military is not even trained for that. They train conventionally. It's nobody's fault sitting here that the Rangers 375 hunting rifle had to be replaced with an automatic machine gun. There is wearing body armor and numerous other techniques and tactics. It's a responsible way. And it's by the grace of God, but through good training and discipline, that in 111 firefights, we're unscathed. Will it remain that way? I cannot be. There's no guarantee. But it's up to us as the leadership to say, if you have this force, what do you do with them? So if we want to demilitarize, which I support, by the way, we mustn't take it too far, then we've got to step up the other actions, because we're at the receiving end And while the rangers are at the receiving end, on my beat and our beat, you equip them well, you train them, you motivate them, and you care for them as people, because it's not pleasant out there, and nobody can just make it go away. If somebody has that recipe, I can assure you, we'd love tomorrow to go back to the rangers and tell them now we count the roan calves and we look at the new butterflies and all those weird and wonderful things that we must do as a conservationist. That now they don't have the luxury and the time to do. It's sad. The money that goes into counter-poaching, can you think if those millions could go into conservation proper? But let's not stop. Let's work towards that. The vision mustn't be to be where we are forever. And we work hard on the conservation ethic, on taking care of the families, utilizing counseling with our rangers. We have an advocate that does every crime scene. Every endeavor is made, but it is sort of unfair. Sometimes one wonders, why would the rangers do it? Why don't they tell us, get somebody, get private security, or tell army to do it, or whoever. It's happening on our beat, so that's what it requires, unfortunately.
I'd like you to indulge me for a minute, because I have a theory that one of the reasons why the poachers do so well is that those who are against poaching are not particularly well organized, and in this country, mainly because some of us would like to see the legalization of the trade in rhino horn as a panacea to the increase in poaching, and others would not. So instead of directing a question at any one particular member of the panel, let me ask everybody in the room 3 questions and hear what the panel has to say about the answer to the 3 questions. The 3 questions are you in favor, are you against, or don't you know, in relation to legalization of trade in rhino horn? So those of you who are against the legalization of trade in rhino horn, please raise your hands. Those of you who are in favor, please raise your hands. And those of you who don't know, yes, I think we got about a 30-30-30 sort of split. I couldn't see properly from up here. But certainly, Judith, there is not a single mind or a common purpose in this room when it comes to what is to be done about the trade of rhino horn. There certainly a good few people who think it should be legalized and a good few who think it shouldn't. And I think that that's something that the South African government, to which the general answers, needs to deal with, because until we are all on the same page in relation to what we are trying to achieve, it's really poachers have divided and ruled those who are against them.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I should have said I'm Paul Hoffman from Accountability Now, for those who don't watch television.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay, there's a hand up there.
Hi, thank you. My name is Ngaya Munua from the Faculty of Law. I'm a PhD candidate. I have noted from the first speaker that there's a bullet point that indicates the role, responsive legislation. I would like to ask the question with regards to that particular responsive legislation, or with regards to how that informs the activities of SANParks, and how do you then monitor and verify its contribution? I'm not sure if that is quite clear.
Okay, thanks. Any third questions? So we can give the...
My name is Kat Novak. I'm with Conservation Action Trust. My first question is for the General. I'm wondering how selective the poachers in Kruger are. Are you seeing multi-species incursions or multi-species poaching, or are poachers focusing explicitly on rhino? And my second question is for Mr. Molokwane. You seem to express disdain for the wealthy hunters who kill for amusement, and yet it seems to me that the hunting lobby has huge influence in this country. I'm wondering if you would like to see that influence reduced. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. We can take these questions for now. I think there was some kind of vote counting. I mean, we don't have the right numbers. And I think my understanding is that the speaker wanted us just to be aware that there are different viewpoints here. And that is the basis for why we are not getting it right, because we are a divided house, if I read that correctly. So we're not doing vote counting here, but I think that was a demonstration of the diversity of views. Okay. Anybody who wants to respond on the policy issue? Is the policy fragmented because of different views in society? The suggestion is that the response is not very effective because society is divided on these matters. Anybody want to respond to that?
Shot on legislation, because the final victory of counter-poaching will occur in the court, not in the bush. You need those people in jail, and specifically their bosses. There's no other way. We have often been talking about the rules of engagement. We have a constitution, so one mustn't expect the constitution to change. That would be, I think, very naive. But here and there, one wonders about the rules of engagement. Not shoot to kill. I don't think that will really change the game. We are satisfied that there has been improvement in the application of the law, in the harshness of sentences, the percentage of convictions. I'm not going to mention the percentages. They can speak for themselves, the prosecuting authority, but we monitor it closely, and it's quite good. It can, of course, be better. One, in terms of legislation, would wonder, is it unthinkable that bail can be automatic? If you rhino poaching, you don't get bail, for instance. Can it be harsher? Can it be almost more draconic, if that will be acceptable in our democracy and in our constitution? One think that some legislation can be adapted to become more effective and to make sure that those final steps in counter-poaching is effective, and it will also motivate the people involved in law enforcement.
Yeah, thanks. The policy dimension, maybe the South Africa, UK policy discussions might shed some light there.
Yes, I mean, I think on sort of the policy issues that the Programme Director you're talking about, I mean, I think it was interesting that, that there was a body in the room that certainly felt they were undecided about the issue of the legalization or non-legalization of trade. And I think, there's certainly room, I think, for more debate, more evidence, more sort of working through on the economies of this. I'm not sure that we, and I think one of the things from the Kasane Declaration was precisely about better targeted investigation and research to understand the economic argumentation. Equally, we saw some statistical and interesting evidence earlier on of the impacts when the sanctions were removed and the growth that led, particularly in the ivory trade. But there was also a perverse indication. So I think, it would be at the Kasane and at the London conferences, I mean, in a way, I think the emphasis was put on there will be different views here, there will be different views inside CITES, but the important thing really is to move together on the areas where there is clear agreement that these need to be checked, they need to be handled, and to try and, as it were, to work further on understanding the different positions. And I think that's probably a sensible position to take, because I also deal with many different policy areas, and, if you have 60 countries together and they all agree on something, that would be extraordinary. Climate change is an area where you have 200 actors virtually in the room and they do not all agree with each other. Nevertheless, the Charabang moves forward. So I think it's I think it's a very important issue, and I don't think it should be brushed under the carpet. I think that's for sure. More evidence, more understanding. But meanwhile, I think that the message is let's get on with what we need to do and we know we need to do.
Okay, thanks. Any response to the other questions?
There's the question of poaching in Kruger, Chair. It's rhino predominantly. Even the meat poaching has decreased. For now, it's rhino. And So the yield is so high, there's no logistics involved. Average set of horns between 6 and 9 kilogram. You throw it into a rucksack, you run, you exchange that rucksack for a checker's bag of money, lots of money. Rhino poaching.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Should we deal with the wealthy and the hunters and how they hunt?
You see, hunting for amusement, I think that's what she was referring to. You see, if a person wants to hunt for amusement in terms of demonstration of wealth status, if this person fails to get what he or she intends getting legally, he or she should get into the illegal way of acquiring that. Just specifically to have that horn, and when people come, and I think she mentioned something like hosting a party for people just to see that I have this kind of a trophy. So if they don't get it, they will definitely get into illegal means of securing that. That's what I meant.
Okay, thanks. We could take more other questions. I've got a hand here and at the back.
This question is for the General again. Do you think that the SANDF have failed in stepping up to the plate and taking responsibility for, more responsibility in the park for protecting our borders and stopping the incursion of basically terrorists into our country?
Okay, thanks. The second question?
Yes, what I have is really more of a comment, but it's addressed to something which you mentioned, General Jooste, and thank you for your deep concern about the fate of the rhino. It's one thing for South Africa to now regard the poaching of rhino as a threat to national security. Surely it would seem that in the way that you have described the emotive issue around rhino, that the rhino is very different to any other animal, that in fact the rhinoceros is part of the South African identity. These are iconic creatures that represent the geographies of our identity, and when they go, something in us is going to die. My name is Ian McCallum. My background is in psychiatry. My affiliation is with the Conservation Action Trust and the Wilderness Foundation. And it would seem to me that if this is the way we are thinking, if this is an animal that is a part of our identity, surely it is time to protect a national asset, as you are saying, which means this is a state of emergency. And when you have a state of emergency, then you have greater ability to determine punishment, bail conditions, and so on. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. My question is directed towards the People in Parks organization. I'd like to understand a bit more why there's a separate, is having a separate organization around people in parks actually prioritizing the notion of communities being involved in the environment, or is it sidelining it? And just to know if there's 2 conferences a year, what else is there? What sort of budgets are we talking about? And yeah, thanks.
Hi, I've got a question to the General. I was curious about the terminology of neutralization. You talked about 174 poachers getting neutralized in the KNP, Kruger National Park, and I was wondering how many of these poaching suspects were arrested, how many of them died, and how many are still in detention. Then I've got a question to Tess. I'm just wondering about the traffic database. I believe there was no poaching database between 1993 and 2003, so I wonder where you have the statistics of basically poaching going down between 1993 and the early 2000s. Thank you.
Thank you all for great presentations. It's, I think, a fantastic start to this seminar series. My name is Paula Kahumbu. I'm from Kenya. And I'm attending this seminar because I think that our experience in Kenya brings a lot. And I'm particularly interested in people and parks. We have a very different history and background, the communities and their relationship to land and their relationship to wildlife to this country. And I loved that statement that you made earlier, that nothing for us without us. So my question is to all of the speakers, how would you inspire and really transform the relationship between the local indigenous Africans and wildlife? Because you're right, there is no future for rhinos or elephants or any animal in this country unless the local indigenous Africans are actually completely 100% on board. What one thing could we do to transform that relationship and respond to what was said earlier, that not enough has been done? Thanks.
Let me start with the question from him about people and parks, whether it is a separate organization. Basically, it is the people from local reserves. You know, the arrangement is that villages around the reserve form what you call village forums, and they together come together, form a park forum. And park forums come together to form a district forum. And from the district forum, 2 delegates sit in the provincial forum. And from provincial forums, 2 members sit in the national forum. Now, currently, it is not just a separate organization. It works with the Department of Environmental Affairs. And currently, our activities are funded by Environmental Affairs. But we are in the process of registering as a non-profit organization without cutting or alienating ties with the department. The basic reason is that the department feels it cannot pump money into a non-legal entity, so to fund our activities, and for us also to can source funding from other organizations with a similar vision. And now about the conference. Conferences are held once in 2 years, not 2 in a year, but once in 2 years. The first one was held in 2004, 2006. 2004 was in Swatini, 2006 in Beaufort West, 2008 in KZN, 2010 Mangaung, 2012 University of Zululand, and last year it was UMTAT. So we're rotating with all the provinces. Now, I think I've already addressed the budget. We don't have budget. We dependent on government, as at this point. Thank you.
Okay. Other responses?
One on the South African National Defence Force. Kruger Park has a 1,000-kilometer boundary. 350 of that is a rather hostile boundary with Mozambique. That's about 10% of the land boundary of the Republic of South Africa. So the question on borders, safeguarding, I'm sure we all know that leaves must be desired not only in Kruger, all around. I wouldn't like to specifically answer the Kruger because where do you plug the holes? And one look at anticipation at the newly established Border Management Agency that seeks to bring together the 7 or 8 state departments that must do that. And I think of late many things has happened in our country to remind us that you've got to have a form of it. And again, without lecturing you, I've recently visited the Mexican border, and with everything that you don't stop people, you don't stop them over the Mediterranean Sea. You don't stop the people that wants to go somewhere. I don't know the answers. Back to the task force, we really try and utilize every participant to their strong points, whether it's the Special Task Force of the police, the Army, the Air Force, and often it's a combined thing where the tracks were picked up and then the chopper took the reaction force out. But primarily it's Rangers because it has become so unique and to the point of militarization. The doctrine of anti-poaching is something that is mastered by the Rangers. So I'm answering in a roundabout way. That is now a national issue. I appreciated the input about the national heritage in more than one way. And as much as we talk hard strategy, this thing, the rhino thing, is huge. And it must unleash positive energy. I can see us all staring each other down now on trade or no trade. Hell, let's make a decision and do it or whatever. I don't know what to be done about. And then there was a loaded question from you, ma'am. My friend and colleague there. Yeah, I was told before not to use neutralize. It sounds sinister, specifically in our country. There are poacher fatalities. And I'm not at liberty to disclose. It's not as if it's hundreds. There are poacher fatalities where, according to the rules of engagement, you try, specifically once they've poached, they have the horn, you try and arrest them, and they try and kill the ranger. Then reaction kicks in. It happens in the middle of the night. You have a split second to decide. And once you've shot, it's a fatality, it's a crime scene. The onus is on us to prove that the ranger did not commit a murder. So with the neutralizations, we should say arrest, but yes, there are poacher fatalities that occur. Unfortunately, it's in nobody's interest, and it's one of the other prices that we pay for poaching and a poaching epidemic. People die.
Okay, thanks. I mean, it looks like we have asked very useful questions for a start. There's still 2 more other lectures that will follow on some of these questions, and we'll be bringing more diverse speakers with diverse views and interpretations about wildlife and people. And obviously, we all concerned about the rhino, but perhaps the discussion shouldn't stop at the rhino, because we don't want to come back here and start talking about the elephants and talking about the lions. I think we need to begin to broaden our understanding of wildlife and people, and perhaps incorporate as many other species as possible. We don't have to wait for the crisis to talk about other animals. So maybe in our deliberations we should think about conservation in a much more wider sense, so that the objectives of conservation are not lost in the middle of all these problems that we have, because later on we might find we have actually lost some of the things while we are concentrating everything we have on one particular problem. It is an urgent problem. It is a crisis, as some will call it. So there will be more discussions tomorrow. We're bringing, as I said, more other people. And you're invited, please, to come back and continue with the discussions. We're hoping that by the end of the 3rd day, we will have some understanding of what is it that we might want to do. I don't think we're going to take clear resolutions, but if some of you want to join the generals in the fight against crime, we can't stop that. But we're hoping that we will see you again tomorrow evening. I wonder whether you... okay, there's nothing else to say. Thank you very much for coming today, and thanks all the speakers.